countering the environmental lords of fascism and tyranny is Lord Christopher Monckton. And he's going to be joining us here in just a moment. He's getting ready to go to the Rio +20. We're talking about several decades after the big meeting that set in stone Agenda 21, Maurice Strong, the world government. What size toilet you can have worldwide, set by the UN. What your carbon footprint can selectively be. What type of light bulbs you can have. And it lists everything that's not dangerous, like carbon dioxide is bad, ignores the overfishing, GMO, all the other serious issues that should be looked at. And I'm not even saying all GMO would be bad, but it's the back doors these eugenicists are putting into them that we've proven. So they're going to be meeting there, going away from, okay, carbon dioxide's bad, we're all going to flood and die day after tomorrow, to, okay, any change is abnormal, and we need to, if there's a cave bug or a warbler bird or a, doesn't matter if the polar bears are 5 times what they were 60 years ago, they can't swim even though they're the greatest land swimming animal. You've got to pay global government money. And they want their Agenda 21 of the seas, Law of the Sea Treaty, which Obama says under executive order he's now implementing, period. All of our rivers, major waterways that are not contiguous to the oceans, 76% of the world's covering is salt and then 1% fresh water, and they are saying they own it all. Doesn't matter if Congress doesn't sign on to this. Obama has announced, Associated Press, that they're going to give immunity to any illegal aliens they want. No judge, no jury, no Congress, no laws. They shut down power plants that aren't owned by General Electric and other insiders to make their stock and profits go up. They give thousands of waivers to big companies that give him money and give the Democrats money from socialist health care, globalist health care. I mean, this is total mafia government. And Lord Monckton is preparing, he joins us via video Skype from London, to travel to Rio, the scene of the crime several decades ago, where they are attempting to re-coordinate their takeover. And as he said many times, we're exposing them, we're defeating them as frauds on that level, but they still have the government and the bureaucracy and the media. They're just moving forward. But Lord Monckton, what do you call this form of government where it's not even really socialist, you can call it fascist? I mean, it's just piratical, criminal, selectively enforced, absolute evil. I mean, what do you call this system of post-industrial, nihilistic fruit cakedom that they're setting up? What would you call it, Lord Christopher Monckton?
Well, you've given quite a few good names there, but it's really predatory totalitarianism. These are people who would have fitted in very well with the fascist regimes or communist regimes of old. They are the control freaks who want to run, as you've rightly said, every detail of our lives down to the last light bulb or bit of toilet paper. And they are all gathering in very large numbers in Rio de Janeiro this week. And they will be talking to one another and, of course, to the fawning media of the world who have fallen for this at every stage. But there's one very, very significant change which I can report already that's come out of this conference. And that is that they have now officially abandoned climate change as being the worst problem that faces humanity. They have now reasserted what was always the case before, which is that poverty is the worst problem facing humanity. And this is a very welcome sign that slowly but surely reality is beginning to break back in, even to these pointy heads.
Very well said. So what is the state of their operations? I mean, they're going ahead with banning Coca-Colas and popcorn and milk in New York. They're going ahead with green police harassing farmers, saying you can't have dust on your farm. I mean, I know that they're in trouble with the Republican polls, but as you warned years ago, when Copenhagen first broke, they don't care. They're just going forward.
Well, they'll count, of course, totalitarianism is very old. It goes back even to early imperial China, 500 years BC. The Chinese were talking of what they called the legalist outlook, and most governments tend to be, to some degree, legalist. In other words, they want to control things, they want to control you. And if they want to control absolutely every aspect of your life, then that's what we now call totalitarianism, and the Chinese would call it, and still do call it, legalism. Whereas you and I, Alex, are Confucians. That's the other side of the Chinese coin, going back to 500 years BC. And Confucianism is the more enlightened, open, democratic, libertarian, free market, come one, come all approach, which says we don't know best. It's the people that know best what's best for the people. It's not for the governing class to say that it knows best and then to impose savage regimes of excessive taxation and regulation to back up whatever the current taboos and shibboleths and fashions are. At the moment, it's the environment, because the left captured the environmental movement some years ago. My good friend, the late Eric Ellington, was one of the founders of Greenpeace. He said he and many other founders had to leave after a year or two because they weren't political. And they didn't therefore know how to stop the entryism by the Marxists, who all piled across the Berlin Wall and straight into our environmental movement and, among other things, took over Greenpeace. So all the Marxists, all the totalitarians, all the fascists will all be in one place. And if someone were to drop a large bomb on it, you'd lose me, but you'd lose most of the pointy heads in the world at the same time. Very large numbers of them have gone there. They're holding a series of events and side events of the most improbable kind, but all of them involve bossing us around, imposing enormous taxes, and above all, this is their real aim, shutting down the West.
How do we defeat them? Why is it important? I mean, obviously it's important, but why, for new listeners, why is it important to go to Rio and cover what they're going to be doing?
Let's give a couple of examples. Before Copenhagen, the climate conference in Copenhagen in 2009, that's getting on 3 years ago, when they were going to try to impose, again, a world government treaty. They actually wrote a draft world government treaty. The word government appears in that treaty in two places. In that context, for the first time I've ever seen any treaty. Now, I exposed that treaty. I got hold of a copy in advance off an obscure UN website where they had hoped nobody would see it, but they would later be able to say, oh, it's been posted up there all the time, when people got caught by surprise. Anyway, I got it out and publicized it, and within a week, the speech in which I publicized it had gone platinum on YouTube. It's the fastest YouTube platinum for any political speech. Likewise, when I went to the Durban Climate Conference just last December and revealed, among other things, that they were going to give legal rights to sue to Mother Earth, I kid you not, Mother Earth, they were going to reduce carbon dioxide concentration to half of what it is today, which would cause mass extinctions of plants, animals, and probably humans too. And they were also going to set up an international climate court to which people like you and me could be dragged for daring to raise perfectly proper scientific and economic questions about what the hard left have been proposing. And when I revealed the contents of that treaty, once again, that went viral all over the internet, and within a couple of days, WordPress, that publish 500,000 blog postings every day, told us that this blog posting by me, just telling people all the nonsensical things that were in this draft Durban agreement, had reached more people than any other one of the 500,000 blog postings that they had put out that day. They put out 500,000 blog postings on all subjects every day. Mine was #1, because people want to know what is being done in their name at these international conferences. And the left-wing media are in conspiracy with left-wing bureaucrats and governments and the UN to make absolutely sure that they don't get told. Now, if you're new to this and you think, what is he saying about a conspiracy? The fact is that unless I had been there to reveal the contents of that document, the main negotiating document of the Durban Climate Conference, nobody else, and I mean nobody else worldwide, would have bothered to tell their readers or viewers or listeners what was in that
That is an astounding point, Lord Monckton, and you've done this every year at these big events. You and folks that go with you are able to get information out, and then it goes viral that no one would have reported on because the lapdog media worldwide just goes along with whatever they're told by Ban Ki-moon.
That's right. They never ask a proper question. And it's uncanny, this sullen refusal simply to report what is actually happening. One doesn't mind that they all have a Marxist viewpoint. If that's what they want, they can have it. You can see the consequences of Marxism now in Europe. That kind of socialism, heavy state spending, heavy taxation, has now become so out of control that it is visibly failing. So if they want to subscribe to that, in a few years' time, everybody will be laughing at them and saying, well, there you are, that was the crisis of Marxism. Nobody now wants to go that way. But at the moment, they're still at it. They'll all be in Rio. They won't have any realization that the gravy train has finally tipped into the gulch and that they can't go on robbing the taxpayers blind because the taxpayers have run out of money. They can't go on borrowing because the more they borrow, the more they put themselves in hock to China. They can't go on doing that. So all this nonsense is soon going to have to stop. I regard it as very significant that they have now abandoned the notion that the supposed threat to the climate is the most serious problem humanity now faces. In the opening sentences of the current draft of the conclusions of the Rio conference, that has now been taken out and replaced, as I've said earlier, by a statement that poverty is the most serious threat. So it's very important. We are making...
All right, you're right. Stay there. And, of course, now poverty, you got to pay the UN taxes. But the UN says they want to make the third world poverty-stricken, post-industrial. Let's talk about your deep research into that straight ahead with Lord Monckton. Then your phone calls. Stay with us. Yes, the UN, the globalist, the crony monopoly men that are anti-free market seek a global dictatorship, organized evil, organized authoritarianism. As Lord Monckton of scienceandpublicpolicy.org, former top advisor to Margaret Thatcher, award-winning journalist. I won't go over it all. His bio is lengthy. And he is joining us from London right now. Okay, this is a short segment, and then we're going to come back and get into other points you think are important and take calls. But we're not overstating, and I know you break down these numbers, of what Copenhagen 3 years ago would have done to the third world if implemented. And they tried to sell that as, come on, you've got to love the black people especially, and the poor Asians and Latin Americans. Let us put this in place. But then the draft got leaked. They confirmed it was the draft. You helped do that. And it was right at double the cuts in the third world that would even be on the West. So they tried to sell it to them as, we'll cut off the energy to the West and give it to you. But they found out it was really a death sentence. And you look at all these, quote, environmentalists, to a man. They put out papers about too many people and get rid of the third world. Really hardcore racists, going back to Margaret Sanger, all of them, and I know you've studied this, Lord Monckton, pose as liberals. They're not even really liberals. That's their cover. A real killer poses as a non-threatening, trendy chicken neck. Can you break down who these people are from fighting them for 30-plus years and correct me if I'm wrong, that their plan is a death sentence to over 1 billion people in the third world when they sell us on it's for the poor. Give us world government. Pay the UN trillions for the poor. Give us the environmental straitjacket for the poor. Tell us what's really happening.
Well, here's the thing. If a nation wants to give money to the poor of other nations, it can do so directly. It doesn't need the UN for that. But the UN has realized it's increasingly hard to justify its existence. And so it has captured various international subjects, such as poverty, and they tried on the climate change thing, the Agenda 21 thing, to make themselves seem relevant and to allow themselves to continue to attract more money from governments. Privately, many of us here in Britain are thinking that even though Britain has one of the 5 permanent seats on the governing Security Council of the United Nations, we would actually be better off giving up that seat as long as we could leave the United Nations altogether and not either have to pay the billions every year it costs to belong or to be governed by the increasingly intrusive regulations and powers that this organization is trying to arrogate to itself. The people behind it essentially are the governing class worldwide, of which I am a member. But I'm one of those, rather like Margaret Thatcher, who doesn't think that it's our job to tell everybody around the world what to do, still less to extinguish poor people in the third world. Extinguishing poverty ought not to mean extinguishing the poor. It ought to mean making the poor better off, because it's only if they become more wealthy and more prosperous, and at least have a basic standard of living that's acceptable, clean water, health, food, also freedom from disease, proper education, proper communications, and of course fossil fuel electricity. It's the cheapest kind of electricity, and that lifts people out of poverty faster than anything. It's only if you do lift them out of poverty that you bring poverty permanently to an end by ending overpopulation, because overpopulation is caused by poverty.
And they know that. The average person in the third world has about 7 children, 5 of them live on average, and the Royal Commission said that in 49. You industrialize, they have on average 1.3 children, and if these people all believe in overpopulation, then make them rich. But the globalists know their fight is to keep us poor. They're fighting wealth. They know that the normal state of humanity is to become more wealthy.
That's right. And this is the main target now of these Marxists or totalitarians or legalists, or call them what you will. But they're very, very unpleasant and ambitious people. They have a hatred of their fellow humans. Some of them have even talked of wiping out 6 billion of the present 7 billion human population.
Lord Monckton, stay there. Incredible. I want you to break down the numbers on this. You are one of the top experts on their plan. And absolutely, they hate everyone. They see someone successful, they hate it. They have a primal dominance, a twisted dominance, though. A true dominance wants to build everybody up. They want to destroy. We'll be back with Lord Monckton. Stay with us. For more than 6 years, I've talked on the air about creating a social network. PlanetInfowars.com is in its beta phase. We're just launching it. And I want to invite all of you out there to be in on the ground level. Planet Infowars is about people coming together, forming activist organizations, getting involved politically, hunting and fishing, gardening, dating. This is a place for people who love freedom to meet and to talk and to write and to post information. And I give you this pledge. We are not going to spy on you and sell your data to the New World Order. PlanetInfowars.com is free, so people who love freedom can get together, connect with people who are awake and know what we're facing. Be active, organize, take action, go viral, create, contribute, resist, because resistance is victory. You are victory. It's waiting for you to breathe power into it. PlanetInfowars.com. Okay, going back to Lord Monckton. Lord Monckton, I want to finish up with their eugenics agenda. You were cut off by the break where you were talking about some of them want 6 billion of us dead. They want green fascism. They want hot baths for themselves, but old ladies should go without. And we know who said that. I mean, this is a really scary group trying to sexy up feudalism. So break that down for us, and then other tidbits that are on the radar screen, because I've been asking the questions, and then we're going to calls.
What's happening here is that the world's governing class has got out of hand. It's got used to the uniquely new ability to tax people with great certainty and to a very large proportion of their income. This makes government far more wealthy than ever it was under any communist country. And they're using their power and their wealth to increase that power and wealth still further. And they have come to realize that the biggest cost they now face is in looking after their own poor people and in making contributions to the poverty of others further afield. And it has occurred to some of them, it's really very straightforward, that the simplest thing to do would be to kill all those no-account poor people that don't matter, so that they themselves can be even richer still. This is the kind of childish thinking, and indeed very sinister thinking, that is now prevailing among the governing class. And it's dressed up behind this green fig leaf of environmentalism to make it sound acceptable to people who ought to know better. I had a pointy head email me just today saying that he is a prophet and he foresees that we won't see any climate trouble in the next 100 years. You know, they've kind of got that one. But it's going to be in 500 years' time, and he is the prophet of doom in 500 years' time. He knows perfectly well he'll be dead and the rest of us will be by then, so he can make whatever prophecies he likes and it won't make any difference. This is the kind of pointy-headed stupidity that is now becoming all too commonplace among people who would previously have been properly educated in the Aristotelian canons of logic, in the Pythagorean canons of mathematics, in the Ciceronian and Periclean canons of politics, and they would have a better understanding of how not to be so cruelly stupid. Because the point is that what these people are doing to the world is they are trying to destroy it. They say they're trying to save it and preserve it like some sort of museum piece in aspic. You only have to look at the record of extinctions in the past to see that this is quite a violent place because of the weather, because of the volcanoes, because of the meteorites, because the sun occasionally grows dim. All these things have major impacts down here. They have much greater impacts than anything we can do. And these have caused mass extinctions in the past. We now have the capacity to cause mass extinctions if we were to use widespread nuclear weapons, for instance. But by adding a little bit of carbon dioxide to the climate, we're not actually going to make very much difference apart from making things a lot more agreeable and warmer in places like Scotland.
And by the way, since you raised that, just to interrupt, Lord Monckton, since you brought up the sun, when you were at Copenhagen 3 years ago, really routing them and then had the police beat you up and all the rest of it, and of course that's they've gone after you at other events as well, and it's been caught on tape. Here's National Geographic, solar superstorms, how they could impact our high-tech world. And all the mainline scientists, as you know, say that the sun's the main driver. A child knows that. It's variations. But they had a vote, and the UN said, to counter you and others, that we vote that the sun has no effect. I mean, this is cuckoo. This is like saying the sun doesn't make the sun come up in the morning. I mean, this really shows their I guess it's not childlike authoritarianism. They're used to a population that just believes whatever they say. But how do they counter National Geographic? It even admits, and it's a big, pro-eugenicist outfit, anti-human deal, that the sun's driving climate. I mean, it seems like are they letting reality in? I mean, why?
I think finally reality is beginning to break through. See, the left have made 3 rather big mistakes, perhaps strategic mistakes, in the last few years. First of all, they created the European Union as a communist, bureaucratic, centralist oligarchy, rather like the old Soviet Union in Russia. That has now failed, as all such communist systems are bound to fail, because the money to pay for it has run out. Then they switched onto this global warming bandwagon. That has now failed, which is why they've suddenly realized that they can no longer get away with saying to people that climate change is the worst problem the world faces, because it isn't. The worst problem the world faces is poverty. And getting the UN to do anything about poverty is completely hopeless. Money that goes to the UN tends to stay at the UN, paying for the lavish lifestyles of the people who run it. So the third mistake I think the left have made is to attempt to set up a global government without having a good reason to do so. They've tried to pretend that, first of all, global warming was the good reason. Then they tried to pretend that protecting the environment is a good reason. Neither of these is a good reason for a world government. And even if there were to be a world government, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, then that government should only receive power by treaty from democratic nations, provided that that world government shall have been elected by the peoples of the states parties to the convention creating it, and they should not simply be self-appointed as they are now. Let the UN and the Law of the Sea Conference you mentioned a few moments ago, and the World Bank and the IMF, and all the plethora of international organizations that now make our life a misery prodigiously at our expense, let all of them either face election by the peoples of the world or be shut down. That's how I think we've now got to go, Alex. What we've got to do is we can stand on the sidelines and moan, or we can do something about it. What I think we now need is a new global constitution that says that any power transferred to any supranational or global institution shall only be transferred from elected hands in individual nation states to elected hands in these international organizations. No international organization should be allowed to have any fiscal or legislative power, any power over our lives at all.
And you know why that's smart, obviously. I mean, explain to people, Lord Monckton, why that's so intelligent. Because then you counter their whole, we need an international debating society. Okay, you're dictatorial. You're making 83% of UK laws, and the UK is not even, as you've exposed, And I just saw a national poll where over 80%, won out now. I saw another right at 80%. When you really point out to people this is authoritarian world government, it's not just world government, and say, okay, let's get rid of your authoritarian one and let's debate a elected one, then you've taken the wind out of their sails.
That's exactly it. The left have always been terrified of democracy because they know that in the end, democracy will not allow the establishment of these dictatorial entities, or even if they allow it to be established, as we made the mistake of doing with the EU. Now it's all falling apart under the weight of its own stupidity and expense and the greed of the politicians and bureaucrats that run it. And, there are now 30,000 bureaucrats in the EU. Heaven knows what they all do, but every single one of them has a diplomatic passport, at least $100,000 a year, free motor cars, free travel, free perks, diplomatic immunity, you name it, they've got
let me bring that up. I was about, how can Legrand, the head of the IMF, who has diplomatic immunity, tax exempt under EU rules, all this, that she helped make, how can she say Greece needs to pay more to bail out the bankers when she's exempt from those taxes? I mean, what a disconnected Marie Antoinette let them eat cake moment.
Well, that is very well put again, Alex, because the governing class has become predatory. It's become greedy. It's like a wolf taking chunks out of a passing child. Little Red Riding Hood is losing and the wolf is winning, if you like. And this greed on the part of the governing class should never be underestimated. I saw this when I worked at 10 Downing Street. Ministers jockeying to see who could get the nicest grace and favour resident, who could get the largest ministerial car, who could get the best ministerial paintings hung in their office. This kind of terrible greed at the expense of the general taxpayer. And that is really why poverty continues to exist in the West. It's because the super rich, and that is in fact the governing class, not any longer the commercial class, this super rich governing class now treats the people with such absolute contempt. And so what I think we now need is, and I'm gradually assembling this, a group of fine minds internationally, people who believe in the principles that are so wonderfully enshrined in the United States Constitution, and say, right, we now need to have a similar constitution for the world as a whole, so that if and when any further powers are transferred from nation states to supranational or global institutions, they will be transferred to institutions which respect the principles of that US Constitution, not just democracy, but also the separation of powers.
Well, you'd call that 1776 worldwide. Let me bring up one more point, going back to National Geographic, page 44 in the current issue, Lord Monckton. Then we're going to go to calls. Perhaps you can stay a bit into the next hours. We have time to get to all of them because we got you on a bit late. My fault today. They show, on page 44, tracking a stormy sun, and they show NASA from the first measurements in the mid-1950s that were very scientific of the sun, these solar maximums and minimums, and they go on to admit it affects the space weather, the earth weather, and they have the gauge. The biggest one was in 1989. We've seen another big spike in the sun as of late that you've covered. And they're predicting the next big spike coming soon. But the UN voted. They said that the sun doesn't do anything to the earth and it doesn't change. And, I mean, could I pay Al Gore a carbon indulgence, Lord Monckton? And could maybe he make the sun behave itself? I mean, is my SUV, because I'm going to be honest, I got a big truck and an SUV. I mean, are those causing the sun to do this? Am I bad? Could I fund the UN killing some black people? Would that make this okay?
Well, now that you've made your confession on the air, your sins of omission are hereby forgiven.
Good, thank you.
The point really is, of course, that the sun is the dominant driver of our climate. It's where the warmth in global warming comes from in the first place. And as you rightly say, the 2001, I think it was, no, 2007 fourth assessment report of the UN's climate panel, this multi-thousand-page piece of garbage they come up with every few years, they voted, this was government representatives, they weren't even scientists, they voted that with 90% certainty, it was we and not the sun that had the most influence on the climate. China had said, there should be no such vote at all. Some people said there should be 95% certainty. And of course, you can't put...
well, perhaps they should vote that gravity doesn't exist. And if they voted, we would suddenly float off the earth.
Well, that's right. All they've got to do is pass a vote and they can change science. It's rather like trying to tell Galileo that the Earth doesn't go around the sun. You know, this kind of thing hasn't worked in the past. It isn't going to work now. What is, I think, astonishing to me is that you and I, Alex, were brought up in the age of reason and enlightenment, in which science was supposed to be free from these kind of mindless and stupid political or religious beliefs. And now here we are, back into a religious belief that global warming is terrible.
And tell folks about Durban. They actually said now it's just Mother Gaia. That they're going right to the worship like Avatar.
They're going right. It's a very atavistic approach, if you like. They're going back to the Tibetan Buddhism, which regards the largest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, as Tsumu Langma, which means the goddess Mother Earth. And they're going back to this, frankly, pre-medieval, prehistoric, tribalist, sort of shamanic religion, rather than science. And it's a very, very strange thing. And this, mark my words, Alex, this is what's going to bring the left down internationally. Because you can politicize just about everything you touch in the way that the left so poisonously does. The one thing you can't politicize is scientific truth. Either it is so that we're going to see rapid warming, or it isn't so. And within a few years, it will become all too apparent to everybody that it isn't.
So they've committed the Piltdown Man sin. They've taken a monkey bone or an ape bone and put a pig jaw in it, and they've been found out, and now no one's going to believe anything they say.
No, exactly. The jawbone of an ass and a pig's ear have been combined to make goodness knows what monster. But the left is now on the way out. They don't realize it yet. They think they're dominant throughout politics. They control the media. They make fun of the likes of you and me. But it is they who are now finished because they've made this colossal mistake of climbing onto the climate bandwagon just as all the wheels are falling off. They've tried to politicize science itself, and like it or not, you can't do that.
All right, well, we're going to go to break here and maybe keep you 15 minutes the next hour because I know there's people really chomping to talk to you. Chris, Richard, John, Mike, Ronnie, we're going to go to all of you. They all want to talk about Agenda 21, other questions there. Actually, Chris has a question, a reactor question, but these are questions for Lord Monckton. Like I told folks, 800-259-99231. Yes, we have several reactors here in Austin. The problem is they don't upkeep them, and then the word is they've been hiding waste around places. So I certainly don't want to be glowing green. So we'll be right back with Lord Monckton.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done has been right.
Lord Monckton's our guest. Let's go to your phone calls. We're going to go to Mike, Richard, John, and many others. Mike in Mass, you're on the air. Welcome.
Yeah, how you doing today, Alex?
Pretty good.
I was wondering, first of all, with Lord Monckton, I was listening to, I think it was like an NPR affiliate. They had some crazy lady on talking about how she related the Earth, saying that it's a living, breathing creature and evidenced by the changing seasons. And she actually advocated that we need to go through the United Nations to create a crime that is above crimes of genocide for crimes against the Earth, and we need to prosecute people.
Oh, no. That was pushed at South Africa, Lord Monckton.
Yes, you're quite right, and there are a lot of people in the environmental movement who want to do this, who have been fooled by James Lovelock's so-called Gaia hypothesis. And of course, the reason why the seasons come and go is very well understood. It is because the Earth's axis is at an angle to the plane of the ecliptic in which it orbits. And therefore, at one moment, the North Pole is closer to the Sun, the next moment the South Pole is, and at the equinoxes it's halfway in between. And that is what makes the seasons come and go.
That's preposterous. Everybody knows there's blood inside the Earth, and it's actually a big turtle.
Well, there you are, exactly. And it's held up on the back of a huge man. Yes, no, I mean, this is the extraordinary thing, is that we're now going back to a sort of pathetic medieval or even prehistoric tribal witch doctor kind of religion, replacing science. And you get all of this gibberish about how the Earth is hurting. No, it isn't. The Earth is more than capable of dealing with us, and if we are sensible and look after it in a common sense way, as most Western countries have long done, then the Earth will not come to any harm at all.
That's right. Let's go back to the caller, sir. I mean, what else did this woman say? Because I've seen it, I hear it, it's everywhere. I mean, the humans have to be dealt with. Gaia needs a little snack of blood.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Alex. It was really ridiculous. They kind of just gave her free range to talk about this stuff for about 20 to 30 minutes straight, and she was saying that we need to go through the United Nations, that we're killing the Earth, that it's worse than killing, that it's worse than genocide, it's worse than a mass extermination, that carbon emissions are bad, having kids are bad, polluting is bad, everything's bad. Basically, humans are evil, and they need to be dealt with. So.
Well, no, let me expand on that. I appreciate your points because I've seen and read that similar sentiment, and then they ignore real environmental issues just to say give world government power. But I wanted to get Lord Monckton's comment on that. I mean, the caller is not exaggerating, and I've seen UN statements like in their Biological Diversity Assessment 96, not the one on the web, but the actual copy I have in my film Road to Tyranny, the full text. They say ancient societies knew how to deal with overpopulation, to not crush the breast of Mother Earth. They had human sacrifice, and that's what ancients did. They said there's too many of us, take him up to the top of the pyramid, cut his heart out. Lord Monckton.
Yeah, this is exactly what they're now advocating again. I find it astonishing, this return to a kind of childish primitivism. It's an enormous backward step for humankind, but the great thing is that if we watch the left taking this step, and it is all on the left, nobody on the right is saying these half-baked things, then gradually people will realize that they're no longer dealing with a rational political force. They're dealing with maniacs who hate people, they hate the Earth, in fact. They would love to do harm to it by denying it the carbon dioxide, after all, which is the food of plants.
Unbelievable. Back in 60 seconds. Another hour straight ahead, and then a huge news blitz and more calls. Believe me, there's a lot of it straight ahead. Stay with us. Short segment here, long segment coming up with Lord Monckton. Your phone calls, and then a big news blitz. A lot of really important news. Obama now announces he doesn't even need Congress on immigration. He'll just legalize the illegals. That's Associated Press. That's called dictatorship. Let's go ahead and talk to who's up next here. We just talked to Mike in Mash. We're going to move along now to Richard in Alberta, Canada. You're on the air with Lord Monckton. Go ahead.
Hello, Alex.
Hey.
I'd like to ask Lord Monckton a few questions, but first, if I might, I would like to take a time to do a brief overview on how Agenda 21 is being implemented in Canada here. In recently, Alberta, in the province where I'm from, we just elected former UN bureaucrat and New World Order operative Alison Redford as our premier. She is pushing through a number of bills, including the Land Stewardship Act, which robs Albertans of our natural property rights so they can take our land.
And by the way, Australia did this and took half of the farmland off limits. They take half the land and set it aside, or you can pay huge taxes on it, and it's just devastating these people. Lord Monckton, you've been to Australia a bunch. I'm going to go back to you, caller, but I mean, he's not joking about these land grabs. Give us your take on that.
Well, this is a growing problem in Australia. I met one of the people who had his land grabbed, and he and his family had been farming there quite peaceably for several generations. Then along comes the state government one day and says, right, we're confiscating your land because we need it for a carbon sink so that we can comply with our obligations under the treaty which Kevin Rudd signed, one of the many global warming.
Sounds like Mao Zedong, and I've seen the polls there. Over 80% are against it, but the authoritarians don't care.
This is exactly it. They now regard everything and everybody's property as their own to do what they like with. They want to take it away from people and put it in the hands of some sort of environmental management committee. Increasingly, this is happening, or they're trying to make it happen. I'm glad to say that in Britain, we're fighting back against this, and we've said that property rights have to be respected. In Australia, they're still not doing that, partly because the opposition has been rather ineffective. They haven't really made enough noise. They haven't stood up and opposed this. And nobody has provided the funds to allow people who have had their property effectively stolen from them.
And then later they give it to their buddies. This happened in Austin. They took 50,000 plus acres from the mid-90s on and then turned around and built on it. They took it from farmers. They just took it, Lord Monckton. And now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's happening all over America and all over the world, where corrupt local and national governments are helping themselves to private land in the name of the environment and then simply building on it, destroying whatever environment it had, and profiting mightily by robbing the people who previously owned it.
Well, that's what's sick. I've gone to smart growth conferences, and they just look at you when your camera's off and go, yeah, we know it's a scam, and laugh at you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're quite right. They know it's a scam, and that's the crucial thing. They know that this is simply a method of organized robbery of by the rich bureaucrat and the bureaucratic class of the governing class.
Real fast, I want to have the caller in Canada. No, I've seen this. She went to the Bilderberg this year. Are Canadians aware you're about to go under the same land grab that just happened in Australia?
Unfortunately, most of us are oblivious. I'm filming a documentary. I'm trying to I have a YouTube channel. I'm trying to inform people as best I can. But most people, they're such statists. They have they worship and grovel to government. It's quite pathetic here. They don't have the spirit of 1776. They don't have the spirit of liberty. They don't have this fire in their belly. It's quite pathetic. But what was going on before is there's also another bill that they're passing. Alison Redford is. She's talking about how basically they're doing a mass overbuild of power lines, which is going to raise the cost of energy here in Alberta, and it's a monopoly.
Yeah, giant scams. We'll be back with more calls. Yeah, these people are total criminals. They know exactly what they're doing. Lord Monckton straight ahead. Well, Obama's Axelrod has announced they want to try to pass a law restricting free speech. You can't make this up. The Department of Labor wants to ban children doing chores on farms. You know about that. Well, now they want to have people that report on the economy have to get government-issued computers. We talked about that earlier in the week. It's just so crazy. They're using al-Qaeda to attack Syria. I'm not saying Assad's a good guy, but, I mean, I'm supposed to give my rights up because al-Qaeda, and then now the NATO and folks are funding them. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funding research into bracelets that track mental and emotional responses in school to make sure you're being brainwashed properly. Lou Rockwell's came out on the show yesterday. That video's up at Infowars.com. Ron Paul will not endorse Mitt Romney. It's also all mirrored at PrisonPlanet.com. And killer drones coming to a sky near you. And they're announcing their #1 mission will be to enforce the environment. The spy satellites are not pointed at the Russians now. They're pointed at us. And they've got the Air Force drones enforcing your cows. If water runs off, any brown water into the local creek, giant fines. Any hay dust, $2,000 a day fines. There's no law. They're just doing it. Lord Monckton, I'm going to rush through some calls in this final segment with you, but I've noticed in the UK, also in the EU, and I've seen the same thing, the announcements that drones and spy satellites are now watching the farmers. But not big agro, watching the small, endangered family farm. I noticed Stalin kicked people off the farms and tried to collectivize and kill tens of millions. Mao did it. He has the record. Our government says he killed 64 million. Chinese say 86 million. But whatever the case is, I know you've studied that and traveled the world. Why do the, quote, environmental fascist communist always want to get people off their land? For the earth, of course, and ban the Amish selling milk. I mean, why is there this attack on rural communities by the, whatever you call these creatures?
They're jealous, that's what it is. They want the land, which is now occupied by the farmers. The best way to do that is to invent some fictional reason why the farmers ought to have to take it off them. And that's why they have these drones now flying around watching us. It's bad enough having Google Earth being able to see straight into your bathroom window. Now you've got these drones as well. So you need to wear a hoodie and a baseball cap at all times, even inside the house, then they can't see who you are. It's really got to the point now where one would almost feel justified in shooting some of these drones down if they came over us. I mean, it's outrageous the way the authorities feel that they can treat the ordinary people with complete contempt. Now, I'm not advocating that you should actually shoot these drones down, but certainly I think it's now become a real worry that we have, for instance, in Britain, more surveillance cameras on every street corner than anyone else in the world. I told you on the last program that I had an Inland Revenue spy getting into my club the other day and asking me questions, and it was only halfway through the conversation that I realized who he was. This kind of game that's being played with the citizen by the authorities.
And these little secret police think we're all criminals. It's like a little mental illness they have, and they act like we're bad just because we want freedom, and they all think they're James Bond. Let's go to the calls. We've, again, got scienceofpublicpolicy.org proprietor Lord Christopher Monckton, the third Viscount of Monckton and Brenchley, on with us, leading fighter of these green tyrants. Let's talk to who's been holding the longest here. John in Montana, mountain country. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hello, gentlemen. My question is on Agenda 21, human rights and the future of formed governments in the world or in the United States. They use the semantics and legal interpretation and the government's theft of land and other items from the people. Can I have Lord Christopher Monckton speak on that, and then have you, Alex Jones, speak on the constitutionality of that?
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Let me go first on this. Your Constitution, which I keep by me at all times, says that the supreme law of the United States is the Constitution, alongside the laws made by Congress and any treaty made by the Senate in accordance with the provisions in the Constitution. That too becomes your law. And this is where the danger is. Increasingly what is happening is that presidents like President Obama, who tend to put everybody but America first, will agree to these treaties over and over again. Now, they realize they can't get them through the Senate because there are still senators who are willing to stand up for America. And as you know, a treaty shouldn't become a treaty unless the Senate says it should. But there's a kind of get-out clause which the Supreme Court has been using. It's been saying that even if the Senate doesn't make a treaty, but yet a particular international agreement is something which all nations ought to be taking part in, then even if the Senate hasn't voted for it, it's increasingly being treated in law as though it were.
Yes. Yes.
And this is a big problem. It means that one cannot merely hope that the people that you elect to defend you from precisely the kind of power grab that's going on by the governing class worldwide will actually be able to defend you from it, because the Supreme Court, as at present constituted, is beginning to overlook and overrule your Constitution.
Lord Monckton, what do you call it in international law? I mean, I guess an oligarchy, where it's the bureaucracy, special corporate interests that are anti-free market, working as monopoly men, with an executive doing what it wants. I guess that's really fascism or an oligarchy, because now Obama says, I'm going to legalize the illegals, no law. I'm going to shut down the power plants. That's how we started the interview. And I mean, really, now everybody's calling him a dictator. But again, it's the special interest that run him. So the dictator, the titular heads come and go, but they're bought and paid for by the same interest. I mean, how do you respond to something that lawless?
Well, what you do is there's a procedure in United States law, as there is in United Kingdom law, called application for judicial review of administrative action. And this means that any public servant who acts beyond his powers can be taken to court and made to behave, just as we took the Department of Education here in the UK to court because it didn't have the power to hand out Al Gore's propaganda movie, this mawkish sci-fi comedy horror movie of his. It didn't have the power to hand that out to schools because it was propaganda, and propaganda in schools in the UK is against the law. And we won the case, and therefore they had to send out 77 pages of corrective guidance to each school before the film could be shown there. And this really is the key thing. You need to find people who are wealthy enough to be able to fight cases on judicial review. So if Obama says he's going to have an amnesty for illegal immigrants, then he must go to Congress to get that. He cannot do that by executive order, and if he tries, then somebody should take him to court and say, no, you can't do that, however powerful you are. You have to abide by the law of that until Congress changes the law of the land. That's the way it works in a democracy. That's what your founding fathers had intended, and that's what you must insist on.
Very well said. Let's jump to some more calls.
Minister of Action.
Let's talk to Lloyd in Florida, listening on the Big 810 AM, where we're #1 there in Orlando on Agenda 21. You're on the air with Lord Monckton. Go ahead.
Alex, I want to thank Lord Monckton for his wonderful information that he's putting out, but I'd like you to put me on hold. I want to talk to you on a different subject when he finishes.
Okay, well, it said Agenda 21 right there, but you have a quick question for him, and I can come back to you later.
Just come back to me later, please.
Okay, it said Agenda 21 there on the screen. That's we don't really screen your calls when we have a guest. It's a let's go ahead and talk to Jeffrey in Colorado. You're on the air.
Jeffrey, well, you got that. Anyway, I just found you guys earlier this year, and thank God for your message and what you're doing, and that probably comes from those of us who care about America.
Well, brother, we're all in it together. Thank you. Do you have any questions for Lord Monckton?
Yes. You're going to the summit. What I was wondering is there a possibility to be able to post the names of everybody involved in this massive takeover, and or post their pictures, because you need to start taking an offense instead of a defense.
Well, that's quite a good idea, to name them and shame them, as I did to this Inland Revenue spy the other day, Dr. Paul McCallum. And that's a very good technique. And I think a lot of us who have access to the media should do this more often. We should name and shame those in the public authorities who overstep the bounds of their authority and go too far and try to set up these global governments. Now, of course, in practice, the only people who know who's going to Rio are the UN organizers, and they certainly won't give out the list to anyone. But one of the purposes in being there is that we can see which organizations are there, we can work out who is funding them, and then we have learnt a trick from the left. We are now quietly talking to the funders of some of these big so-called charitable environmental organizations, which are in effect about the destruction of the planet, and we're saying, take your funding elsewhere. These people are crooks. You don't want to be associated with them when they eventually get exposed and go under.
And the funding is leaving them. And again, you call them the left. I know they identify themselves as that. I just see them as authoritarians posing as planet savers. I mean, because there are some people that associate, the left with civil liberties, things like that, but you never really see that from them. I mean, do you think the left is the proper name for them?
Well, the left is the name traditionally in our politics, for the totalitarian faction. If you are a totalitarian, then you're on the left. The National Socialists in Germany, they were on the left. Hitler's fascists, they were on the left.
Stalin, Mao.
Stalin, Mao Zedong.
Fidel Castro.
Oh, yeah, all of these people, they are on the left. They are authoritarians. They're not authoritative. They're authoritarian.
I guess that is a point. Most of the mass murderers claim they come from the left. Lord Monckton, scienceandpublicpolicy.org. Look forward to having you and Mark Moreno from Climate Depot live from the conference next week. Thank you for going, and we'll talk to you soon.
Look forward to that, Alex, and God bless you, and as always, God bless America.
Thank you. We'll be right back with more calls. Stay with us, and news. Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds?